To get in the championship, I need to decide if I'm going to be starting the Chargers or Lions defense. We'll talk about defenses later in the video. I would love your opinion down in the comment section. But first, we got to rank these quarterbacks and tight ends. I don't really need to rank tier 1 quarterback for you. You already know what to do. If you have Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, or Jalen Hurts, yes, they're very easily in your starting lineup. You can make an argument, yes, Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels are also very easily in your starting lineup. Typically, I'm putting Daniels ahead of Burrow, given the rushing upside that you get with Daniels that Burrow doesn't give you. But specifically this week, Jaden Daniels does have a pretty tough matchup going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, where we actually saw Daniels struggle with only 14 fantasy points last time he played Philadelphia. Now, of course, that's not inherently a guarantee that we're going to see him struggle yet again. I 100% would start him, but you do have sportsbooks putting the Cincinnati Bengals as an offense that should score about 6 more points than Washington this week. Going down to tier 3, this is where you really begin to have some questions. We all know top 5 quarterbacks, you're starting them regardless. Baker Mayfield is actually very low with projections this week if you are looking at Underdog Fantasy. This is despite Baker actually coming off of back-to-back performances with 20 plus fantasy points. This quarterback that's given you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 20-point performances so far this season. Obviously, we had the lull in the middle part of the year where you had no Mike Evans and no Godwin, but now you have Evans fully back, plus Jalen McMillan is sliding a bit into that Godwin role, and Baker just absolutely went out there and crushed the Los Angeles Chargers this past week. And what's actually surprising with Baker is he is sprinkling on some rushing upside. He's the quarterback 5 this season in total fantasy points scored. But again, I do want to reiterate the projections are very low currently on Baker Mayfield on Underdog. So maybe there's something that I'm not taking into account for with this matchup at Dallas. He's only higher or lower 237.5 passing yards, which if you look at the games that Mike Evans has played, Baker Mayfield has effectively hit this mark almost every single week this season. So maybe I'm higher on Baker than projections. I wouldn't mind going with higher than 237.5 passing yards for the game Sunday night. But of course, if you want to detail us on that, you can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description, in the comment section. It's available in damn near every state. Yeah, it's in California. Yeah, it's in Texas. Yes, it's in Florida. And if you use code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to be getting a free Joe Burrow pick more than less than half a total yard for Sunday. Going over and looking at Jared Goff, we are actually in a situation in which the Detroit Lions have half their team on the injured reserve at this point. Specifically on the defensive side of the ball, this is a Lions team that has completely collapsed. And I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if what we see over the next month is similar games to what we had against the Packers and the Bills, where you actually have Jared Goff getting forced to drop back. You had 58 pass attempts against the Buffalo Bills. You had 41 pass attempts against the Green Bay Packers. Now, this matchup against the Chicago Bears, they're pretty heavily favored. They're favored by about a touchdown. But again, you have no David Montgomery as well. And while Jahmyr Gibbs is my running back 1 overall this week, I wouldn't be surprised if you do have this coaching staff asking Jared Goff to do a little bit more than he has previously. Now, of course, with Goff as well, I will have to mention that the downside case that you're looking at is the fact that he is not going to have the same rushing upside as what you're going to get with somebody like Baker Mayfield or somebody like Kyler Murray. Honestly, you have the Arizona Cardinals as about 4.5 point favorites here against the Panthers. So the game should be close-ish. Like they should have to throw the ball a bit. Plus, you actually have the Arizona Cardinals, according to sportsbooks, projecting out as one of the highest scoring offenses in the league. Not to mention that Kyler Murray does have some rushing upside. While he's definitely been running the ball a lot less as of late. Over the past 7 games, you've only had 2 contests in which he's had over 20 rushing yards. But I mean, all this points to Kyler Murray, really being set up in a spot to crush this next week. But he has just been wildly inconsistent. If you're looking at Kyler in comparison to some of these other quarterbacks, Kyler Murray has only hit 20 fantasy points 5 times so far this season. In this matchup against Carolina, you assume that if they're ever going to be able to run it, it's probably in a game like this. Sam Darnold will be the next quarterback, obviously against the Chicago Bears. Darnold really doesn't do much. You only get 231 passing yards, but Here in this matchup against the Seattle Seahawks, the spread's very close, so you're actually going to assume that the Minnesota Vikings are forced to throw the ball. I mean, we saw that 2 weeks back against the Atlanta Falcons, where Sam Darnold did go through with the 350 passing yards and the 5 passing touchdowns. Darnold's looked great over the past 5 weeks. This is a quarterback that's currently sitting here with 12 touchdowns over the past 5 weeks, averaging about 2.5 touchdowns a game. Again, this matchup against Seattle looks like Geno Smith's going to play. And assuming that Geno Smith does play, then at that point, I think Darnold is going to be forced to throw the ball. Now, going down to our next quarterback, this is where I throw my hands in the air and I go, okay, I don't know what to expect with this tier onwards. I have Brock Purdy as my starting quarterback in the Flock League. Obviously, massive week. We're trying to get into the championship here. Thank God I had the bye week last week, or I would have started Purdy against the Los Angeles Rams, and I would have had to deal with the 4.98 fantasy points. And I'm sure if you had to start Brock Purdy, you're probably rolling your eyes at me even ranking him here, because Purdy really has not been consistent. You saw the 2-point performance against Buffalo. You get the sub 5-point performance against the Rams. And this is a lower floor than what you have with really any other quarterback in this tier, maybe not named Anthony Richardson. But again, if you look at the weather in these games, it wasn't exactly the best. Here they're playing the Miami Dolphins. I do actually expect that this should be a game where the Niners are forced to throw the ball. They are currently slightly projected to lose in this game. And as long as the weather is going to be fine, Purdy has been hitting 20 fantasy points most weeks. You really need him to get back and start showing you some rushing upside. Like Tua in this game, the Dolphins do have a favored mark of about 1.5 points. Obviously, Tua blew up against the Houston Texans this past week. But if you look at the 4 weeks prior to that, Tua did have 20 fantasy points every single game. And you do have an implied team total at 23 points this week for the Miami Dolphins, which is higher than what you had against the Houston Texans in week 15. Looking at Jordan Love, according to sportsbooks, the Packers are actually expected to be the second highest scoring offense in the league this week. They also have the second largest spread of any team in the NFL at 13.5 points against the New Orleans Saints. And the expectations are that the Packers are going to be able to just run the ball over and over and over again. You're actually seeing this with the projections that you have for Jordan Love over there on Underdog, where he is currently higher lower 224.5 passing yards. Obviously, Love hits this most weeks. But again, the issue is they're probably just going to be able to run the ball consistently. So even if the offense is super high scoring, probably a lot of those points get funneled through Josh Jacobs. Matthew Stafford's my other quarterback in the Flock League. I would love to know if y'all think I should be starting Stafford instead. Stafford, in comparison to Purdy, definitely is going to have more passing volume, right? I mean, you can just see this with what he's been able to accomplish since you've had Puka Nacua as well as Cooper Kupp back in this offense, where if we remove this past week with the bad weather against the Niners, you're looking at 2-2, 4-2-4 and a couple mixed in zeros. But ultimately, since the bye week, Matthew Stafford has been averaging about 2 touchdowns per game. And the passing volumes looked a lot better than it was, obviously, before the bye when you add no Puka Nacua. Now, if you're looking at Stafford on Underdog, he is currently higher lower 243.5 passing yards. Here in a matchup in which sportsbooks are putting the implied team total at about 25.5 points for the Rams. But this is my big decision this week, and I'd love to know what you have to say in the comment section between Stafford and Purdy. Stafford on Underdog does have the higher projections when it comes to the passing yards, 242.5 versus 237.5. But again, I do think you have more rushing upside with Purdy than you do with Stafford, and that's going to make a difference in a 4-point passing touchdown format. Now, I know everybody's going to be very upset with us with this Bo Nix ranking. Bo Nix has been much better than this so far this season. The main issue that I'm going to have with Bo here is it's just a really tough matchup that you have going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. Here it's a Thursday night game where you actually have an implied team total of 19.75 points here, according to sportsbooks. So actually, out of the top 15 quarterbacks, and even include Anthony Richardson as our next guy, out of the top 16 quarterbacks on this list, the Denver Broncos are currently projected to score fewer points than any other quarterback that we have ranked. I feel like you kind of have to give credit to Bo Nix so far this season, though, Because, I mean, if you're looking at him post Raiders breakout, you're looking at 23, 21, 14, 29, 18, 16, 28, 19, 14, 16. So he has been very consistent, getting you about those 15 points per game. But the main issue is sportsbooks are just projecting the Chargers to have a big bounce back week defensively. I'm looking at Anthony Richardson. The Colts are actually expected to score significantly more points. And you would say, okay, well, Anthony Richardson's going to have a lot more rushing upside. So if his offense is going to put more points on the board, does it not make sense to start Anthony Richardson instead? And to be honest with you, it may. But Anthony Richardson this past week, 172 passing yards. The week before, 109. The week before that, 172. The passing volume is just absolutely pathetic here. I think it is a rush first offense. You have a higher lower at 181.5 passing yards for Anthony Richardson in this game. Most weeks, he has not come close to this, but you do have the rushing upside, of course, where he is a viable start in a 4-point passing touchdown format if need be. I'm going down to our next tier. Obviously, if you're in a super flex league, you're starting these dudes, but Mahomes is actually in a game that has a very low over-under against the Houston Texans, and we don't know exactly how healthy Mahomes actually is. Aaron Rodgers is coming off the 30-point bomb, but this was actually Rodgers' only third game scoring 20 or more fantasy points so far this season. Decent matchup against the Rams. Caleb, yes, he actually blew up against the Detroit Lions earlier this year, and the Lions have been decimated on the defensive side of the ball. You actually have the Chicago Bears only as about 6-point dogs in this game. I mean, naturally, if the Lions were fully healthy, I would assume that the Lions would be favored by almost double-digit points. But the Bears offense should be better than people are expecting. Right now, you actually have the Atlanta Falcons with Michael Penix, projected to be one of the highest scoring offenses in the league this week with an implied team total north of 25 points. But the issue that I'm going to have is massive spread against the Giants. We're going to assume that Atlanta can just run the ball over and over and over again. And then our last tier of quarterbacks, they're super talented guys, but don't start Justin Herbert. Don't start CJ Stroud. Going over to tight end, I don't need to talk about McBride, Kittle, Bowers. They're in their own tier. Their tier is so much higher than anybody else on this list. And those top three tight ends, if you have two of them, hell, honestly, you could put one in your flex. Now, going down to the next tier, I think we can kind of just wave the white flag and say, yeah, it's over with Kelsey. Jonnu Smith is officially tight end 4. It's crazy to see that the first 6 weeks this season, Jonnu Smith had not eclipsed 50+% of the snaps in Miami. However, from week 7 onwards, Jonnu Smith has been a good enough tight end to be the tight end 4 in fantasy with total points scored this season. He's been incredible over the past 5 weeks. You're looking at a tight end that is effectively averaging about 8 targets a game. This matchup against the Niners, obviously the Niners have a banged up defense, decent total here with the Miami Dolphins. So I think Jonnu obviously must start tight end at this point. Travis Kelce's been a straight up bum. I mean, if you're looking at Kelce, you've had 3 games this season with 20 fantasy points or more. I thought Kelce was going to be elite once Rashee Rice came down because he ripped off the 25, 22, 20-point performances. But since then, super disappointing. I mean, again, the main thing with Kelce isn't the fact that, oh, Noah Gray's taking too much. No, Noah Gray's kind of irrelevant here. Like, Kelce's still getting enough volume. He's still having the targets. The underlying issue with Kelce is he's just not finding the end zone. Now, of course, we do know that touchdowns are extremely volatile week to week, so you don't want to hold that too much against him. I'd still start Kelce. TJ Hawkinson as our next call. With Hawk, this is a situation in which I think you can start him if you need to. Am I super, super excited about it? No, because a lot of the target volume is being funneled between Jefferson and Addison. There's not much left over, but clearly Hawkinson is operating as the third passing down option in this offense. A decent game environment against Seattle. Our next tier, Sam Laporta, buddy, I'm going to need you. Not only in underdog drafts, but I'm really going to need you in the flock league here. Laporta came through with 111 receiving yards against the Buffalo Bills this past week, which I want to sit here and I want to go, oh my gosh, my guy, he's coming through. Our Savior's breaking out right at the exact time. I want to make that argument. But no, the reality of the situation is Jared Goff threw for 500 passing yards. So yeah, when Goff has 500 passing yards, Laporta's going to look great, but we need Laporta to look good in game environments in which you don't see that type of passing volume for Goff. I'm still starting him, of course. It still should be one of the best offenses in the league, and I'm still hoping that you do have a considerable amount of Goff pass attempts considering the injuries to this defense. And you do have Laporta over the past month. I mean, sitting here averaging about 7-8 targets a game. So he's on the upwards trend. I'm looking at Mark Andrews. Andrews has been crazy with his touchdown rate this season. Like, to just go ahead and look at this. Like, week by week, we'll start off when Andrews actually started being viable in fantasy. The first 5 weeks, he was absolute dog water, horrendous. But from week 6 onwards, 4 targets, 1 touchdown. 4 targets, 2 touchdowns. 5 targets, 1 touchdown. 2 targets, 0 touchdowns. 7 targets, 1 touchdown. 3 targets, 0 touchdowns. 5 targets, a touchdown. 7 targets, a touchdown. 2 targets, a touchdown. All Andrews has done all season is score the football. Now, of course, you would hope that you get some of this going over to Kelsey, but similar to what we said with Kelsey, really, it's going to be extremely volatile week to week if you're looking at these touchdown rates. So it's harder to bank on that, but it's hard to bank on any tight ends once you get to this point. Like, Kincaid comes through against Detroit, only plays 49% of the snaps. You're hoping that actually expands in week 16, of course. Now, side note, funny, everybody hates that we don't rank Shakir as a top 20 receiver. Guys, Shakir is not an alpha. Shakir is not dominating volume here in Buffalo. It's being spread out to a bunch of different options. Shakir has 1 game with 20 fantasy points this year. Looking at Hunter Henry, this is a tight end that actually is kind of the dominant alpha in New England. The difference between him and Kincaid in Buffalo is the New England Patriots offense is so much worse. Like, this game has a 14-point spread on it at the moment. Cade Otton was really strong the month leading into the bye, where you had the 18, 29, 21, and 8.5 fantasy points. I mean, coming out of the bye, you've seen 4, 6, 10, and 4.5. Clear answer is, oh, Mike Evans is back. Mike Evans is drawing target volume. I know a lot of people are super pumped about Britton Strange, and I'm actually surprised to see sportsbooks have the Jags as a decent little offense this week. Not horrendous, but I do want to revisit what we had with Britton Strange with no Evan Ingram earlier in the year. Where earlier in the year, you had 9.5, 9.2, 4.9, 12.4 points. And that was with Lawrence, and that was with him seeing 2 touchdowns off a total of 18 targets. So really hard to project that. I mean, obviously, he crushed against the Jets this past week, and you have a bunch of receivers out in Jacksonville now, so Strange definitely can play him. Kraft, you're hoping for a touchdown, right? I mean, super high efficiency tight end in a great offense, but unsustainable touchdown rate, and it's a game environment in which you probably see a bunch of rushing attempts in Green Bay. Pat Frymuth, I don't know. He scored a touchdown every week over the past 3, but I mean, if Pickens does come back, I think that you're looking at a bad offense this week against Baltimore. At least that's what sportsbooks are projecting, and Frymuth's target share goes down. Ferguson, I mean, here you're looking at a tight end that has not had more than 35 receiving yards since week 9 this year. Kyle Pitts, maybe, just maybe Michael Penix likes him more than Kirk Cousins did, but we've seen a bunch of quarterbacks. None of them like Kyle Pitts. Dalton Schultz, I don't want to say certified bum, but this dude has 1 game with 10 or more fantasy points. Tough matchup. Smart, you can go with them if you really need to. Don't love the matchup. And then also Kmet, maybe with everybody injured in Detroit, you can roll in that direction, but really, I think you're hoping that you got a top 15 guy here at tight ends. Now, going over to defenses, y'all know our number 1 by far and away ranked defense last week with the Baltimore Ravens, who we were so excited about. I thought they were going to be winning weeks on their own. They came in and did diddly squat. Here, the number 1 defense that we have, and it's not even remotely close, is going to be the Green Bay Packers this week. The Packers have already been a phenomenal defense in fantasy this year. They've been the 5th highest scoring unit. They had 7 sacks against the Seattle Seahawks with multiple interceptions this past week. And now you're looking at them going against the New Orleans Saints team with no Olave, with no Shaheed, with no Kamara, with no Taysom, with no Derek Carr. Literally every single piece that would have ever been interesting in New Orleans has now been removed, and the Saints project to be the worst offense in the league this week. So definitely the Packers are the best DST. The Bills would be the next best, the largest spread of any game. I mean, over the past 2 weeks, the Bills have allowed almost 500 yards on average. So you'll want to maybe be a little bit hesitant there, but good matchup against New England. The Falcons have been a garbage defense almost all season, but hell, against the Raiders, they're going out and they're getting safeties. They're recovering fumbles. They're getting interceptions. And this week, they actually get to play the New York Giants. The Minnesota Vikings have arguably been the best defense in fantasy this year, depending on your scoring format. They have a whatever matchup going up against Seattle, though. It does look like Geno's probably going to play. Dropping down to our next tier, we're going to be looking at the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs, over the past 3 weeks, have generated 11 sacks. They had 4 interceptions against the Cleveland Browns this past week. You're more excited about the Chiefs' defense in fantasy if Mahomes does play. The Indianapolis Colts will be our next option. With Indy, am I super excited about their unit? No, they have been kind of whatever this year, but you're going up against Mason Rudolph, so that's exciting. The Los Angeles Chargers will be the defense that I am currently planning on going with. You have the Chargers sitting as favorites against the Denver Broncos. They've been a great defense so far this year. It's a Thursday night game. I kind of want something to root for. Again, let me know if you think I'm making a massive mistake with these defense rankings. Y'all know I suck at them. Going over to our next tier, we're going to be looking at some defenses like the Bengals with a great matchup going up against the Browns, who have nobody left. The Baltimore Ravens, who actually are really heavily favored here over the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is kind of surprising how big the spread is. The Raiders, a garbage defense, but they get to play Jacksonville. The Eagles, great defense, pretty big spread on the game. The Cardinals, good matchup against Carolina. Steelers, Broncos, phenomenal DSTs. The issue is you do have tough matchups. The Lions against the Bears would have been one of my favorite plays if it wasn't for the fact that everybody is now injured in Detroit. And then we have the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are just a dog water defense, but have a good matchup going up against the Raiders. But I think that's all I got for you. Really appreciate you. And of course, if you wanted to tell us on Baker Mayfield to go higher than 237.5 passing yards, you can find that over there on Underdog Fantasy. The link's in the description. It's in the comment section. Code FLOCK will hook you up with a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, plus a free Joe Burrow pick, more than less than half a total yard for this weekend. And at the same time, Underdog is available in damn near every state. Yes, it's in Texas. Yes, it's in Cali. Yes, it's in Florida. Yes, it's in New York. But I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later today.